In the grand halls of ancient Rome, where marble pillars shone under the Mediterranean sun and power was worshipped like divinity itself, the story of Emperor Nero and a young boy named Sporus stands as one of the darkest chapters in human history. It is a tale not only of imperial madness, but also of the annihilation of identity, where love, obsession, and cruelty became indistinguishable. Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus ascended the Roman throne in 54 AD at only 16. In the early years, he was hailed as a visionary ruler. He reduced taxes, supported the arts, and mingled with the public in theaters and festivals. Rome saw in him a new dawn, a leader who seemed both cultured and compassionate. But beneath this promising surface, seeds of paranoia were already sprouting. By 65 AD, Nero's reign had descended into terror. Surrounded by flatterers, isolated from reality, and haunted by fears of conspiracy, the emperor's mind began to fracture. Nero's first marriage to Octavia, daughter of Emperor Claudius, was purely political. Their union lacked affection, and Octavia's quiet virtue stood in stark contrast to Poppia Sabina, a woman of rare beauty, wit, and ambition. Poppia captivated Nero completely. What began as passion soon turned into possession. Nero guarded her jealously, assigned soldiers to control her movements, and showered her with gifts of unimaginable luxury. He divorced and exiled Octavia to marry Poppia, alienating allies and shocking Rome's elite. Though Poppia enjoyed her influence, she was not a submissive consort. She criticized Nero's excesses and demanded respect even within the palace. But such defiance only fueled his volatile obsession. In 65 AD, during a heated argument, Nero struck her in a fit of rage, killing her and the unborn child she carried. Poppia's death shattered what remained of Nero's sanity. Overcome with guilt and despair, he begged her corpse for forgiveness and ordered physicians to revive her under threat of torture. He embalmed her body, an act foreign to Roman custom, and proclaimed her divine. A cult was established in her name. Statues and altars rose across the empire. For days, Nero spoke to her lifeless body, commanding his court to behave as if the empress still lived. To deny this illusion meant exile or death. Rome's palace became a theater of madness, where courtiers pretended to see life in the eyes of the dead.
Amid this atmosphere of fear appeared a young freedman named Sporus. Born into slavery within the imperial household, Sporus had been trained in administrative service and educated in the ways of court life. His youth and striking resemblance to the late Poppia caught Nero's deranged attention. The emperor, trapped in grief and delusion, began to see in Sporus not a servant, but the possibility of resurrecting his beloved. To the Romans, resemblance was more than coincidence. It could mean spiritual continuity. Nero's court whispered that the boy carried Poppia's spirit. For Nero, this belief was enough to justify the unthinkable. In perhaps one of history's most horrifying acts of cruelty, Nero ordered physicians to alter Sporus's body to resemble a woman's. Ancient medicine offered no safety, only pain, mutilation, and near-certain infection. Yet under imperial command, the surgery was performed. It was not merely a physical transformation, it was the systematic destruction of a person's identity. Sporus was stripped of manhood, freedom, and name. His suffering was endured in silence, for disobedience meant death. After months of recovery, the emperor's fantasy deepened. Sporus was dressed in gowns once owned by Poppia, adorned with her jewelry, and renamed Sabina, after the dead empress. The imperial artisans crafted elaborate wigs and makeup to disguise the remaining traces of masculinity. Tutors trained Sporus to walk, speak, and gesture as a Roman lady. Every movement was rehearsed, every word was measured. What Nero called love was, in truth, psychological torture. Sporus's existence became a performance, an endless masquerade for the pleasure of a tyrant. His reflection no longer belonged to him. In the spring of 67 AD, Rome witnessed an event that defied both reason and morality. Emperor Nero married Sporus in a full imperial ceremony. The rituals were performed as if it were a legitimate union. Guests applauded, priests blessed, and the streets echoed with forced celebration. Sporus, veiled in gold, stood beside the emperor, an unwilling bride to Rome's most powerful man. From that day forward, Sporus was treated as the empress. He received servants, wealth, and quarters within the palace. He accompanied Nero in public, smiled at ceremonies, and played the role of a loving wife. Nero addressed him as Poppia, expecting responses as though her spirit truly lived within the boy. To survive, Sporus learned to act, to mirror Nero's delusion, to hide his terror behind practiced grace. In 67 AD, Nero embarked on a grand artistic tour of Greece, taking Sporus with him as his empress. He competed in singing contests, theater, and games, while Sporus stood at his side as a symbol of divine companionship. To foreign dignitaries, it was both shocking and pitiful. Rome's emperor parading a mutilated youth as his resurrected bride. But back home, rebellion brewed. Governors rose in defiance, the Senate turned hostile, and even the Praetorian Guard abandoned him. In June 68 AD, facing capture and execution, Nero fled Rome with a handful of loyalists, including Sporus. Trapped in a villa outside the city, Nero chose suicide over humiliation, dying with the words, "What an artist dies in me." With Nero dead, Sporus's fate became even darker. No longer protected by imperial power, he was passed among Roman elites who viewed him as a grotesque trophy of the fallen emperor. Men like Poppia Sabina and later Emperor Vitellius kept him as a living curiosity, forcing him to continue his role as Poppia. Under Vitellius's rule, Sporus was ordered to perform in public spectacles, reenacting mythological scenes of humiliation. Facing the prospect of sexual degradation before thousands in the Colosseum, Sporus made his final act of defiance. He took his own life, likely by poison, around 69 AD. He was barely 20 years old. Sporus's story was recorded by ancient historians like Suetonius and Cassius Dio, not with compassion, but as an emblem of Nero's depravity. His identity was reduced to a symbol of decadence, a victim whose suffering served as moral warning rather than human tragedy. Yet, when we look beyond the imperial cruelty, Sporus's brief life reveals the unbearable cost of absolute power. Nero's obsession was not love, it was domination. His treatment of Poppia and Sporus illustrates how obsession can blur into ownership, how grief can turn into madness, and how identity can be erased by tyranny. For Sporus, every breath became an act of survival, until his final act of suicide reclaimed the autonomy that Rome had denied him. The tale of Nero and Sporus remains one of history's most haunting reflections on power and humanity. Beneath the splendor of Rome's empire lay unimaginable cruelty, where the will of one man could destroy another's body, mind, and soul. Sporus's tragedy reminds us that behind the marble statues and imperial legends were real people, young, vulnerable, and voiceless, whose suffering has echoed through centuries. In the end, Sporus was not merely a victim of Nero's madness, but a silent testament to resistance, a soul that refused, even in death, to remain a puppet of tyranny. His story endures as both a warning and a requiem for when power forgets compassion and love becomes control, humanity itself perishes.